Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. We've been on a slow trip through Exodus chapter 4, and today we're going to finish that stage of our journey. So if you are joining us this time for the first time, you'll want to pause here and go back and watch the previous 6 episodes because they're going to tie all of this idea together for you. Before we get started today, I wanted to let you know about a resource that could help you if you feel like you want to learn Hebrew. There's a wonderful website that offers free lessons in how to read Hebrew. It's called Aleph with Beth, and I will link it in the description below. And if you are learning Hebrew and you want to try out what you're learning on the book of Exodus and begin to see the kinds of things I'm pointing out in this video, I have an illustrated Exodus that I published several years ago. That is a lot of fun to work through. It's a graphic novel style presentation of the entire Hebrew text of Exodus with pictures and a translation down at the bottom of the page that can just help you with visual cues as you work your way through the book. Okay, so I've been trying to make the case that Exodus 4 verses 18 to 31 is a hinge passage in the book of Exodus. In our first video in this mini-series, the one on verses 18 to 31, I showed lots of interconnections that knit these scenes together as one unified passage. And in last week's video on verses 25 and 26, I talked about how they point backwards to chapters 1 and 2, where women save Moses. Remember the women rescuing Moses story. There's one more tidbit I want to add to that, and then we'll look forward. One thing I didn't say last week is that the name Zipporah is of course the woman, the wife of Moses, who rescues Moses from death by circumcising their son. And the name Zipporah in Hebrew sounds very much like the name Shiphrah, which is the name of one of the Hebrew midwives in chapter 1 who is rescuing baby boys from death by the hand of Pharaoh. So in Hebrew, her name, the wife of Moses' name is Zipporah, and in chapter 1, the midwife's name is Shiphrah. So Zipporah, Shiphrah. You can hear the similarity between them. It's even a stronger correlation in Greek. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, in the Septuagint, the name is identical. It's Sephorah. So Sephorah is the same name used in chapter 1, verse 15, in chapter 2, verse 21, in chapter 4, verse 25, and in chapter 18, verse 2, to refer to both the midwife who rescues Hebrew babies and the wife of Moses. So all of these literary links between the women help us to set apart the Moses story as its own unit, so that these chapters in which the women are rescuing Moses are kind of set apart. God's commissioning Moses to go back to rescue this people who has been enslaved. But that's only possible because of the women who saved him as a child and now save him as an adult. So that sets it apart as its own sort of mini saga, the saga of Moses' rescue. And at the same time, this section in chapter 4 kicks off a new saga, and that is the rescue of the people of Israel. And it too has a bookend. So we've just looked backwards to see how the women in chapter 1 provide a bookend with Zipporah in chapter 4. But this scene in chapter 4 also points forward to chapter 18. And there's all kinds of links between chapter 4 and chapter 18 that help us to see their framing another unit, and it's the saga of Israel's deliverance. And that saga as a whole has all kinds of parallels with the Moses saga. The same sorts of things happen to Israel that happened to Moses. There's so many things in these chapters. It's really exciting. But right now I just want to point out the links between chapter 4 and chapter 18. So in chapter 4, Moses speaks with Jethro about going back to Egypt. And in chapter 18, Moses speaks with Jethro about leaving Egypt. So he and Jethro have a conversation again in chapter 18. And in both scenes, Jethro offers a blessing. He offers peace to Moses. So that's in 4:18 and in 18 verse 7. In both scenes, chapter 4 and chapter 18, Zipporah is traveling with Moses' sons. So that's 4 verse 20 and 18 verse 6. in both scenes, the Hebrew word choten is used, father-in-law or male relative. So that's 4:18 and 18, verse 1, and verses 7 and 8. So that relatively rare word it appears in both of these texts. In both scenes, we have someone who greets someone at the mountain of God with a kiss. So Aaron greets Moses with a kiss at the mountain in chapter 4, verse 27, and Moses greets Jethro with a kiss at the mountain in chapter 18, verses 5 through 7. So again, really similar language that's sort of creating this sense of echo between the two passages. And then in chapter 4, Aaron and the elders of Israel gather, chapter 4, verse 29, and in chapter 18, verse 12, Aaron and the elders of Israel are gathered. So clearly, when we get to chapter 18, all these things that happen remind us of chapter 4, and that echo drives us to ask the question, what is the narrator doing here? Why are we being told this now? What is the significance? And it seems to me that there's a framing going on of the deliverance story of the Israelites. So this story of national deliverance echoes the story of Moses' deliverance, because remember, with Moses, the big question is, who is he? Or whose is he? What's his identity? And that's exactly the question we're going to be exploring in the chapters to come as Israel discovers who they are and whose they are. So I hope this has been a fun taste or teaser of these connections. We'll circle back to it when we get to chapter 18. But in verses 27 to 31 of Exodus 4, which are the verses that we've kind of highlighted today, in verses 27 to 31, there's a wrapping up of this tightly constructed unit where Moses and Aaron meet one another. Moses begins to carry out what Yahweh's asked him to do. He begins to obey by conveying to Aaron everything he's been commanded to do, by showing him the signs. And then they take the next step, going back to Egypt together. And Aaron gathers the elders of Israel, delivers this news, and they are just so thrilled that God has paid attention to their plight, that he hasn't forgotten them, and they kneel down and they worship. That gives us a sneak preview of what's to come, because the whole goal of the Exodus is going to be worship. They're supposed to leave the service of Pharaoh and come into the service of Yahweh and worship him. So we get that kind of in preview form here at the end of chapter 4. Next week when we return, we'll dive into chapter 5, which is where things get a little messy. Have a great week.